Hello there, and welcome to my channel, Novice Modelling and the Midlife Crisis. My name is Andy, and this afternoon I'm going to be trying something new, which is essentially a sort of kit comparison, where we're going to be comparing three different kits of essentially very similar vehicles. They're not the same vehicles, so there are going to be obviously technical and mechanical differences between the three kits. But what I did note when I purchased these originally from a company called Fog Models is that there was a vast difference in price. Now, I don't actually have access to the invoice from Fog Models, but I can actually do a rough comparison of Jadlam, which is a model supplier in the UK. The kits basically we're looking at are the Panther 35065, which was from a new tool in 1968 and new parts added in 1990, which is this particular kit here. This one is available in the UK. I mean, I'm using Jadlam's prices for no particular reason. I've got no association with them, and I'm not trying to encourage you to go and buy stuff from them. But currently you can buy this kit for £14.99. On eBay, the prices tend to vary between £14 and £20 for this one. This particular kit here is the German Panther Type G by Tamiya, and is kit number 35170. This particular one, again, Jadlam using just as an example, is currently going for £25.95, and having a quick look on eBay, you can pick this up as a buy it now for roughly 24 to sort of £35, depending on who you buy it from. And then thirdly, we're going to be looking at the Aus D, which is the latest offering from Tamiya, which was a new tool in 2015 and new parts added in 2018. So this is the newest one that they actually have available, and this one you can get from Jadlam for £37.95. If you have a good look on eBay, you can pick it up from anywhere from £35 to £45. So obviously there's a big difference in price, ranging from sort of 15 to 25 to 35-ish. So I thought it'd be interesting to have a look at these and just basically pull off a few parts off the sprues and just compare them and see exactly where the extra money is going. Because, you know, as a novice that I consider myself to be and am, to me, you know, buying a kit for 15 quid or forking out 40 quid for a kit is quite a big difference. Now, obviously, there are going to be benefits to buying the more expensive kit, but as a novice, do I really want to spend £40 on a Panther when I could spend £15 to kind of practice with? You know, I mean, that's kind of, it's one of those sort of, you know, questions, what if questions, isn't it? So to help me along, being a Koppite and a Kloppite, I'm a BVB Borussia Dortmund fan, so I'm going to be wearing the fourth of my Borussia Dortmund hats. And as previously, I'm finishing off the dregs of my Dab Dortmunder Export, which is quite pleasant to drink even when warm. So cheers. So let's get on with this. So basically, I thought the first thing we'd look at, I'm just going to zoom this in a little bit, maybe out a little bit. I thought the best thing to look at first is going to be some of the main components. And as you can see, the hull bases vary quite differently between the three kits. Quite why they decided to do it this way, I don't know, but obviously this one here is the older one from the tool from 1968, 35065. As you can see, it has a Tamiya imprint for 1969 on the base. The most obvious thing that's different about this one is that these pins that hold the wheels are already affixed. The detailing on it is there, but it's not quite as sophisticated as in some of the later versions. But I mean, as a novice, having extra parts added, that's kind of a bonus. It means I don't have to get the glue out quite as much. Then when we move on to 35170, the tooling from 1993, which goes for around about the 25 to 30 mark, you can see that these actual plates here have been added. Now, one thing, major criticism I have of this particular kit is when you put the two pieces together, not quite like this obviously, there's a bloody big hole here. Now that's obviously not a fair representation of the vehicle itself, it's just obviously a way of making it cheaper. But that's how it comes. And, you know, as a novice, just wanted to practice on something. I'm not really that bothered about it. But obviously, if you were to turn the tank over, you're going to see a big, ugly, silly gap. So they've obviously decided to put these plates on in the later version to rectify that quite glaringly obvious problem. As we can see when we put the two together, these springs here are, I would say, slightly better detailed. So obviously the quality of the mold is superior. And then when we compare this to the final model offering, which is this particular one here, 35345, the detailing gets even more sophisticated. Again, we haven't got the pins, they've been taken off again, but we've lost our panels, our top panels. But don't worry, the top panels that go on the top here are actually just basically an extra part to add. As we can see, it says 2015 in this particular moulding. So basically, for me, this one is not as good. This one's kind of good because I don't have to bother gluing this on. And this one basically is going to be more difficult or more challenging or just more interesting because you've got another part to glue on here. So, you know, you can basically decide for yourself which one you prefer. So just to remind you, 30565, 35170 and 35345. Okay, put those ones out of the way. Now we're going to look at probably one of the most important parts, because this is the part that's, you know, one of the main parts of the tank, and this is the top of the hull. The one we're looking at here is the earlier version 35065, and if we get this up close, you can see that this has a sort of mottled effect to the plastic. Now I'm not sure quite exactly what this is, whether this is supposed to represent foundry marks or whether this is some sort of very early attempt at putting the zimmerit on it. But I kind of like this, as it's not smooth, there's some texture to it. I'm not quite sure how accurate it is, obviously, because I'm no expert in these things, but I kind of like that. Now obviously a lot of these parts here, which are probably going to be added onto the later versions, are already in place. Everything here looks okay. I mean, you've got these sort of welding points here where the armour of the hull has been put together. And generally that looks quite nice to me, so I've got no real complaints about that. That looks fine. I quite like the mottled effect of the metal or plastic or whatever you want to call it. So moving on to 35170, comparing it to the earlier one, obviously we've got this engine hatch which has to be added. That's kind of interesting because I suppose you could have that flipped up with sort of mechanical work going on. You've got one of these vents is in place and one of them is attached. It needs to be attached. Why? Don't know. It seems to me that these bolts here, or these fastenings, are probably slightly more accurate in their representation than these ones, which are a pretty kind of lame attempt if you ask me. There's more definition to some of the parts and the plates. Again, you get the front fenders on. These ones are quite obviously different in size. Don't know, maybe that's a sort of an improvement of accuracy, or maybe it's just a difference between, you know, an earlier House A and the sort of Type G, which is a later model. This one obviously comes with a port here. Sorry if you're looking at that one, this is actually that kit for this machine gun. There is no sort of port here. So there we go. So this plastic on this particular one, as you can see, is totally smooth. We've got some attachments here, here and along here, which are obviously for all the accessories, which are, you know, basically the same sort of, in the same sort of position as the ones on the earlier version. So there's the first two tops compared. And then moving on to the later variant, which is the 353435. I'll get out of the way. What we can see again is we've got a very smooth plastic, but we have these minor indentations. Now, at first I kind of thought that this was sort of flaws in the moulding, but what I've kind of come to believe it is it's a sort of representation of shrapnel marks and you know, bullet marks or whatever. And I think that's pretty cool at the end of the day. I mean, quite how visible they're going to be once I slap a shed load of paint on, I'm not quite sure. Obviously we've got differences in attachments. We're going to have to put our engine bay hatch on again. This one has attachments for both of the vents, which is kind of interesting, and the vents are a different size, which again is kind of interesting as well. They're actually the same sort of size as on the very early version of the 35065, but they seem to be thinner and better defined, where these are kind of a bit chunky. So I'm guessing that this is a more accurate representation of these vents, but that's just a guess. We can also see again, we've got these sort of welding points where the plates go together, and there are more of these points along the hull, which are conspicuously absent from the earlier versions. So obviously, as far as these pieces are concerned, we're getting a slightly more detailed hull. I mean, again, we've got sort of rivet marks on this panel here, which are absent on both of these panels. And here we can see we have to put these front sort of mudguard things on as well. So there's obviously quite a bit of difference going on here. I mean, there's this port here which comes up, which is different. So I mean, obviously these are sort of technical differences between the different variants. So that's that one out the way. Thirdly, we're going to look at the tracks. This particular set of tracks, this is out of the 35065 earlier variants. As far as I can tell, the tracks are identical in 35170 and 35345. And if we look at them, again, I'm not quite sure whether the wider tracks were provided in the later variants. That is quite possible. But these are definitely not as flexible, and to me seem better quality. Maybe that's all it is. There's also seem to be better detailed as well. The width doesn't really appear to be that different, but there's definite differences between the two. These ones are better. These are from the later variants. So that's that done. These side skirts here, they only come with 35170 and 35345. These are the early ones. Obviously, there's a distinct difference in size. These are definitely just sort of flat metal panels. These ones have a sort of contoured edge to them, which isn't really that apparent on the cover art, but it's definitely there. I mean, again, these seem to be better detailed, but I'm just going to hazard a guess that these are just slightly different versions of the same thing on different variants. So as to, you know, which one's a better quality one or which one's a better version, I'm not quite sure. I just think they're two different ways of doing the same thing. Next, we're going to look at our turrets. This one being our 35065. Again, it's got this sort of mottled effect on the plastic. This one here being 35170. Again, totally smooth. And this one being 35345. As you can see, it's got these sort of weird shrapnel marks on it again. So again, I kind of like this because this seems to be more accurate. There are definite differences in how these are going to be going together. Obviously, this has got sort of this ridge on here, which is, I'm assuming, part of the cupola. This hatch here, not quite sure what that's all about. There's definite differences on the sides. Again, we've got these nice weld marks on this one. Not really so much marks on this one, and these big sort of chunky affairs on the earlier one. And we've got different ways of assembly. This one has the front part of the armour requires sticking on. This one already has it in place, and this one needs something attached as well. So I mean, again, we're looking at different variants. We're looking at an A, a G and a D, so it's quite possible that they are intended to look slightly different, and obviously they do. As for shapes, you know, they all seem to be pretty much the same shape, to be honest with you, which we would kind of expect. So there's our turrets out the way. Next, we move on to the back plates. Yeah, which one's which here? Can't really remember which one's which. This is the earlier variants, again with this mottled plastic. Seems to be quite well detailed, but when you compare it to these ones, obviously the detail is finer, and I'm going to guess because it's more recent, it's going to be a lot more accurate. There's not really that much more to say about these. This is obviously the later one, because again you've got these fine little pitted marks on it, which again I'm just assuming that that's shrapnel markings. So that's the later one, that's the middle one, and that's the early one. Not much to say about them, they're kind of bland. Moving on to a section of road wheels. Here is the earliest version. Again, you can see it's got detail on it, it's got the nuts. They look kind of bland and uninteresting, as nuts I suppose should be. Moving on to the, trying to get my colours right, that one, that's the in the middle version, the 35170 Type G. Our nuts are becoming a little smaller and slightly more rounded, so I'm going to guess that that's a better representation. On this particular one, we're getting less nuts. We're also getting this part of the cover added, it would appear. There's not much to say about that. I mean, they're just the wheels at the end of the day. So, kind of like a whatever statement, isn't it? It's just the wheels. Here we have the 3 different gun barrels. This is the earliest version. Again, it's got this mottled effect on the barrel. It looks kind of similar to the intermediate version, the second one, but you can see here on the muzzle, it's got more detail on the muzzle, so obviously that's an improvement. The barrel, sorry, I haven't got the muzzle off on here because it's 2 small pieces. The barrel off the AUS D, the later variant, is a single piece barrel, so it doesn't require gluing together with all the potential hazards of sort of lines that you can expect from putting 2 pieces together. So I mean, that's obviously an improvement. I think a lot of people end up replacing these with metal barrels, but I believe they go for about £10 a pop, so I won't be doing that. And moving on to, last but not least, the figures. So this particular one here, this is the figure that comes with 35065, and as we compare him to the middle one, 35170, we can see that he's not very good. There's a lot more detail on this middle one. It's a lot finer, a lot crisper. Does need a bit of sort of minor filing because there does appear to be some seam lines on this. This one's already got its headphones attached. Headphones are an additional option on this one. I mean, this one obviously is better because, I mean, we've got basically a 25-year gap between this one being moulded and this one being moulded, so it's unfair to say that this one's rubbish because, well, this is just an older version. This one is better. The AUS D, which we have behind us, model 35345, comes with something that I've not seen before. It's basically the bodies have to be glued together. Not too sure what I think about that. You get a lot of detail on the legs, a lot of folds and creases on his trousers. I'm not going to say there's much difference between them. I mean, obviously he's got a slightly different version of the uniform on with these large lapels. Maybe this is more of a winter one, this is more of a summer one. Don't really know. But comparatively, you know, in quality, they look roughly the same. I mean, obviously this guy needs his head attaching, which, you know, if you're one of these people that wants to put different heads on, that's fine. I have actually looked at the heads on this particular one, and they are quite obviously different, so I think they'd be perfectly good to use. So, I mean, obviously this one or this one, I mean, I think my preference is the middle, to be honest with you. But this one does look a bit naff. So, that's basically how I've just worked this comparison out. So, like I say, we've got Panther AUS D, which is 35345, which seems to go for sort of 35 to even £45. You can have this one, which is the Type G, 35170 from the 1993 tool. This one goes for roughly 25 to £30. And you can have this one, which is Type A, 35065 from 1968 original tool, which goes for sort of 15 to 20. I mean, the way I'm looking at this is I've got all 3 of these, and if I went to, I've actually got another AUS D as well, which I actually bought as a sort of bargain. But for me at the moment, this is perfectly adequate because I'm a novice. I don't want to spoil 40 quid, you know, waste £40 to make a bit of a mess. So for me, this is perfectly good. Obviously the other ones are better, but it's interesting for you and me to see what the differences are. So that's why I thought I'd do this video. Sorry it's a little bit long, but that's just the way these things go. So I'm quite happy with, you know, doing this one as my first 135 armour experience. But I've got to be honest with you, I think the one for 25 to 30 quid, the Type G, is pretty good. And I am kind of struggling, apart from, you know, the sort of slightly interesting pit marks, for which I'm assuming are simulated shrapnel wounds. I don't really see a great deal of benefit on spending the extra, you know, 10 to 15 pounds to get the House D. Got to be honest with you, that's just the way I'm looking at it. They both look kind of the same, except this one has got more parts, basically. There are more parts to go on this. So if you want something that's more complicated, go for that one. It's got slightly better detail on the hull with these pit marks, but this is a perfectly decent model as far as I'm concerned, in my opinion, as a novice. So there we go. Thanks for joining me. Please do like and subscribe, and join me for my model building ride. I'm going to start building this one later on, I reckon. I've got a few more videos that I want to make, but I think I might have a go at putting some bits on this one. And maybe we'll do these two in a month or so. See how we get on, and then we'll put the 3 finished models together. And, well, it's all going to be about painting, really, isn't it? I mean, you know, whichever one gets painted the best is probably the one that's going to look the best. So, yeah, be seeing you.